Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We are getting ready for one of the biggest weeks of the year. It is one we have had circled for months and months and months, traveling to Texas for a Dog Nation invasion this weekend, trying to find out how we can beat these Longhorns, number one ranked team in the country, favored in the game. First time we've seen Georgia as an underdog in quite some time, and it's just a huge, huge task, perhaps made more complicated by what Georgia showed this past Saturday against Mississippi State. So we're going to cover all of that ground here today. What we didn't like in the game against Mississippi State, why Georgia has more of a chance to win on Saturday than perhaps some realize. Jon Stinchcomb helps us do that. There's big recruiting news to get to in the program here today. We will also touch on a little bit of a hot topic as well, as a lot of Georgia fans looked around and noticed something in Sanford Stadium on Saturday they did not necessarily like. We'll cover that today there as well. As you can tell, we are as jam-packed on a Monday as you can possibly be. So let's get it started. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There are some weeks that are just bigger than others. It's just a fact. While the players and coaches try to treat every game the same, sometimes that ends up just being lip service. There are games, clearly, that matter for tangible and in some cases intangible reasons more so than others do. This upcoming Saturday for Georgia, as you already know, is one of those games. Texas will play its first big game in the SEC against a traditional SEC opponent when Georgia travels to Austin. We'll be there for our Dog Nation invasion and trying to figure out how Georgia can win this game based on what we've learned about Georgia over the course of the previous regular season games is, of course, the hottest topic here this week. In fact, such a hot topic that Kirby Smart, even in the midst of Saturday's aftermath of the win against Mississippi State, where there was some stuff you maybe liked, some stuff that you didn't quite like very much, even he was already talking about the game coming up against Texas because that's what everybody wants to discuss. So let's let Kirby Smart's words from Saturday lead us into what is going to be a big week of breaking down one of the biggest regular season games that Georgia has ever played. Kirby from Saturday evening.
Lessons, I don't know that much of it carries over to Texas. You know, the defensively, you can't give people things. I mean, we literally gave 14 points. And I'm not talking about the 4th and 2 that we don't cover the guy in the flat. I mean, I'm saying they earned that. But we gave 14 points. We gave up 2 back-to-back wheel routes in the first half, and then we gifted them 1 on 3 third down conversions in the second half. So, you know, you take 14 points off the board, you feel a little better, but there's still things that they did to frustrate us, and they did a nice job.
So that's Kirby Smart talking about the issue with the defense, and obviously as that leads into the game against Texas, a more high-powered offense, just more accomplished. They won easily against Oklahoma on Saturday. Against our wishes, we were hopeful that there might be at least a little bit of drama there in that rivalry game. As it turns out, there wasn't. That's because of how bad Oklahoma is, but it's also about how buttoned up of an operation that Texas was on Saturday. They deserve credit for all of that. So those are Kirby Smart's comments, obviously referencing Georgia's defensive issues as something to be cleaned up as you move into this week's preparation with the Longhorns looming there on Saturday. Now, let me give you a simple point about this game, and this is going to be the thing that we hit over and over and over again here this week. I believe that there's essentially only one path to victory for Georgia against Texas. That if you close your eyes and picture what a Georgia win on Saturday looks like, I believe there's really only one way you get to that outcome. I think that Georgia's going to have to beat the Longhorns in a shootout, sort of a Texas-style shootout if you want to think about the old gunslinger cowboy movies from back when your granddaddy was a kid or something like that. I think that's what Saturday has to be. And anything other than kind of a wild shootout-style game probably just doesn't really add up to a Georgia victory. And by the way, even in a sort of a shootout-style performance, you're still not guaranteed of a win. But if Georgia is on its way to winning, it's going to have to match the offensive firepower that Texas probably brings to the game. Now, when you hear me say that, you're perhaps first assumption might be because of what Kirby Smart just referenced, that maybe the Georgia defense right now is just so suspect that's Georgia's only way to get this done. Now, we're going to talk more about some of those defensive issues in a moment and perhaps how Georgia kind of rectifies some of that. We're going to do that here in just a little bit. But my actual reason for kind of describing the path to victory being a shootout is not necessarily all that related to a Georgia defense that's suddenly far more vulnerable than we're used to seeing it be. My reason for saying that Saturday against the Longhorns probably needs to be a shootout for Georgia to win it is because if you really look around, that's sort of what college football has become. And there was a time in, like, say, 2021 and 2022, as we've talked about plenty, that Georgia was in sort of a category by itself. It was capable of playing games that looked way different than every other big game in college football looked because of how different Georgia was as a team. Think about the Tennessee game in 2022. Georgia was able to kind of just bully Tennessee around, lean on defense, lean on clock control, and really choke the life out of a team that came into that game ranked number 1 in the country. But this year, against another number 1 type team, we don't expect Georgia to be able to play that way. Not only because the venue flips, you're on the road instead of being at home, but just because now Georgia's just more like the other teams in college football. In a game like Tennessee in 2022 or, other games you might cite from that era, Georgia showed itself to be in a class by itself, a category unique to itself. But now Georgia is more like just the rest of the sport. So therefore, Georgia's big wins are probably going to have to come in the same manner that other teams sort of get their big wins. Let's go back to this past weekend, for an instance. The biggest game of the day was Ohio State and Oregon. That was a game played in the 30s. Both teams had to be into the 30s to give themselves a chance to win. Ultimately, Oregon found a way to get that done. Coming into the game, and really for the last couple of years, Ohio State defensively has been better than it's been offensively. They've got quarterback issues. You saw that with your own eyes. Oregon, probably a little bit more with Dan Lanning as a head coach, a little bit more of a defensive team too than they have been offensively. The fact of the matter is Dylan Gabriel has struggled a little bit for the Ducks. And yet these two teams coming into the game, perhaps a little bit more led by defense. The truth is when they played each other, like a lot of big games in college football right now, it sort of turns into the shootout. Georgia against Alabama was a little bit more of a shootout, the likes of which you see around a lot of the rest of college football, because now Georgia is, and we said this at the time, that Georgia-Alabama game is just sort of the start of an era in which Georgia just looks a lot more like the rest of college football than it's ever been before. But even in the midst of all of that, Georgia in its very good defensive era still had to win its share of shootouts. Rose Bowl against Oklahoma in 2017, most famously the Peach Bowl against Ohio State in 2022. Georgia just had to find a way to outscore its opponent to win those games. To its credit back then, that's what it did. And on Saturday, I believe that's what it will need to be able to do again. On the other side of the field, Texas much the same way. Go back and look at a big breakthrough season for the Longhorns a year ago. Plenty of shootout-style wins. On the road at Alabama, 34-24. That's a relatively high point total, all things considered. The loss for Texas last year was to Oklahoma. That was a 34-30 game. Week after that, even against Houston, they're winning 31-24. Beating Kansas State 33-30. That's an overtime game against a ranked Wildcats team there. Their playoff loss to Washington was a shootout. They lost 37-31. No stranger to playing the kinds of games that makes the sport so entertaining. In a very good year for them, they look like much of the rest of the college football and how they earn those wins. And now Georgia is that same kind of team there as well. No longer dominant enough to take the air out of the ball, control the game with running the ball, control the game with great defense. Georgia probably has to play the game like everybody else does. If Georgia's going to win, it may have to be 40-something to 30-something, or it may have to be 40-something to 40-something. Georgia may have to score and score and score some more against Texas, who's trying to do the same exact thing, if we're going to see Georgia get to the victory, get to the finish line as the victors there on Saturday. Now, as we talk about how that happens here this week, how Georgia perhaps wins a shootout-style game against Texas, I want you to understand something. I very much believe this is a possibility for UGA. I'm not here to guarantee it because it can't be guaranteed. In fact, Georgia's projected to lose. You already know that. But I very much believe that winning is a possibility, even though we would acknowledge that Georgia on both sides of the ball for full 60 minutes, 4 quarters, is going to have to play a much better brand of football in this game than it has played at any other point in time this season. I believe that's absolutely possible against Texas on Saturday. And here's the other thing I want to say, and this is where we have to sort of be honest with each other just a little bit. I can't see our comments right now because I can't really look at the comments and talk at the same time. But my guess is on all of our platforms, those watching on the X platform, those watching on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, all those platforms, my guess is there's a lot of people on there, if I had to assume, maybe laughing at me a little bit, or maybe saying I'm being too much of the phrase you sometimes see online, the idea of like the Disney dog, the fan who's a little too, that the online parlance is the quote-unquote Disney dog is someone who's too positive, who thinks that things are likely to be more successful than realism should suggest they possibly will be, that there's probably some negativity in our comment section today because there's been a lot of negativity around Georgia football over the course of the last couple of weeks. Certainly since the loss to Alabama, there's been more of that than we've seen the last couple of years. And I want you to understand something. I certainly understand why there is criticism of how Georgia's played here right now. At times this year on both sides of the ball. I totally get all of that. I truly do. But here's the other thing that I want you to know, because we've been now doing this for a little while. This is our 10th season, believe it or not, of doing DawgNation Daily. Sometimes it's hard for me to imagine that I've been here as long as I have, and I appreciate great sponsors like Pella Window and Door of Georgia who've allowed us to do that. But in 10 years, almost 10 years of doing this job, here's the one thing that I've noticed, is that the feelings of fans going into a big game doesn't really turn out to be very predictive for how that game is going to play out. In other words, before all of the really big wins that Kirby Smart has gotten during his era as head coach, it seems like there's always some pocket of very vocal and very online UGA fans trying to get everyone to notice them as they go to great pains to describe how impossible a victory for UGA is going to be. These people have predicted wrong incorrectly over and over again, but it doesn't stop another pocket of those same fans from showing up just in time for another big game to tell you it's not even worth watching because so-and-so doesn't belong in the field or so-and-so doesn't belong in the coaching box or whatever else. And that doesn't mean that Georgia's not, worthy of criticism at times. It just means that sometimes the intensity of the criticism doesn't match the actual facts on the ground. And I don't do this very much, and I don't take pleasure at doing this right now. But I want to give you an example of this here for a moment. Perhaps for me, one of the most interesting stretches of Georgia football in recent years, maybe of all time, was that stretch after the SEC championship in 2021, prior to what turned out to be the greatest two-game performance probably in Georgia football history. Easily winning the Orange Bowl against Michigan to earn the right at a rematch against Alabama, a game in which Georgia won, Keely Ringo interception. The rest is history, truly, as the Dogs got that first national championship for Kirby Smart and slayed what up to that point in time had been a really formidable monster for the program, Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide. And what was so interesting to me about that is how much, even after kind of a remarkable run through the 2021 regular season, so many people turned on Georgia so quickly once they lost Alabama. Admittedly, not a good performance for UGA, the same way we can also admit that some of the performances this season for the Dogs have not been very good. But the level of criticism that Georgia was receiving back then prior to playing against Michigan was, if we're being honest here, just grossly overstated and proven so with the way that game played out. And what happens is once Georgia plays well, you can't really find the people who were saying all the negative stuff before the game. They either change their usernames or just sort of disappear off the internet, but they're not there to take their medicine for what they said prior to the game. But we do occasionally save receipts. I want to show you this on the screen if you're watching on video. I don't take pleasure in doing this. I really don't. And I don't know any of these people personally. I'm sure they're great Georgia fans, and I'm sure that, I don't know. I can't speak to their state of mind. But this is the kind of stuff we were hearing before Georgia beat Michigan in 2021. You had DGD 2602, a YouTube commenter saying, upward trajectory, sarcastically based on something I said, shaking my head. You honestly don't feel like we're settling with Stetson Bennett at quarterback? Just can't believe that you guys feel like he is the best we have. He would go on to win 2 national championships. John Main, 1565, in the week leading up to the Orange Bowl against Michigan, wrote, here's a question I never see asked. If Kirby Smart constantly keeps saying, quote, we're going to play the best quarterback that gives us the best chance to win, then what does that do to the confidence of the 3 5-stars riding the bench? I mean, he's saying a walk-on that can't win a big game is better than you? Sorry, but you're not good enough to get a chance. But this walk-on that always chokes under pressure is. Stetson Bennett supposedly choked under pressure in the big games, and yet he goes down as one of the all-time greats. Once again, the predictions of Georgia fans prior to the big game not turning out to be very indicative of the actual result from the big game. Kenneth Herron, 4366, also on YouTube that same week, writes this. We will never win a national championship. We're going to get embarrassed in the Orange Bowl. I just can't watch as a less than stellar player takes the field, as a straight stud watches from the sidelines. Michigan's going to destroy Stetson and keep our defense on the field for 60 minutes. The straight stud, JT Daniels, would bounce around to 2 other schools after he left UGA, and now he's trying to be a coach. Talking Rock 7011 also writes, it really doesn't matter how many receivers Georgia has. With 3-and-out Stetson Bennett playing, Stetson couldn't even hit James Cook from 5 yards standing away from him. And then Joe 31533. And there's, by the way, something about these series of numbers as a part of the username for these kind of common comments here, writes, Kirby's going to let his bullheadedness cost us a championship this year. It already cost us the SEC championship. And listen, I could go on for days reading comments just like that before all of the big games that Georgia has played and won in recent years. This is just the way that it is. That people, when they see a blemish around Georgia for whatever reason, especially the very online brand of Georgia fan who has several numbers next to his username, for whatever reason, there's an attempt to kind of turn up the criticism beyond just what's reasonable, given the fact that at times Georgia's play might be worthy of criticism. The intensity of that criticism doesn't seem to match the moment very well. So this week, if you're looking at our comment section, or if you're looking at social media, or perhaps you're a member of a message board, don't let the level of criticism that Georgia's currently receiving stand as proof of what the result's going to be on Saturday. The truth is, Georgia may not win. They may not be capable of producing the sort of shootout-style performance I've described them as needing. But the prediction of some Georgia fans about whether they will or whether they won't, that hasn't stood as very meaningful in the past. Georgia has outperformed the expectations of some of its fans many times before. And don't be surprised on Saturday, no matter what you've seen from them thus far this year, don't be surprised on Saturday if that same thing doesn't happen again. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and we're glad you're with us, no matter how you get to us today. Video, 10 a.m. across all platforms. Radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Podcast, wherever you find them. Apple, Spotify, all the other platforms there as well. Just really happy to have you as a part of the program here today. And as I said before, so thankful. We think about all the years we've been doing this and how many years great sponsors like Pella Window and Door of Georgia have been with us there as well. I love Pella because, frankly, I love my home. And I love the fact that so many of you kind of view your home the same way that I do. As it's just your home base, right? It's your number one financial asset in many cases, but it's also the source of your memories and it's just the place where you live. And it's the place where you're making your memories each and every day. And so taking good care of that home, it's the smartest thing you can do. And so that is what our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia are all about. Energy efficient windows and doors, keeping the good feeling on the inside where it's supposed to be, looking good on the outside. They're all about that there as well. And they're about great savings for you there too, because between now And Halloween Day, October 31st, you can get 10% off your Pella project or no interest if paid in full within 12 months. Stop by and see them, Experience Center in Duluth, or check out this website. It's PellaGA.com/DawgNation. That's a little bit different than the website we've given you sometimes in the past. Let me say it for you again. PellaGA.com/DawgNation. And you can also give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. When you reach out and have them come talk to you or you go see them, just make sure you tell them that BA from DawgNation Daily said they would take good care of you. I know they will. They've been doing that for folks in our audience for a very long time. We love Pella Window and Door of Georgia and can't wait for you to find out why Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. All right, Jon Stinchcomb here coming up. There's a lot to talk to John about. Obviously, the game on Saturday, but also some Georgia fans not too happy with something they saw in Sanford Stadium on Saturday that perhaps had nothing to do with the players and coaches themselves. We'll get into that with John here coming up in just a little bit, too. Prior to that, let's get ready to go around the doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. So I said a moment ago that for me, the game against Texas, like a lot of these big games in college football, both this weekend and in recent history, it just seems like in the battle of big teams, offenses prevail. Used to be that Georgia could avoid some of that because of how good they were defensively. They are no longer in a category by themselves, defensively or as a program overall. They can still be the best team in the sport, perhaps, but they are now playing a brand of football that looks like much of the rest of the sport there, too. And on Saturday, and we told you we would get here, eye-opening defensive issues, especially in the second half, where all of a sudden Mississippi State just decided, you know what, we're just going to play chuck and duck offense here and just hope that somebody's down there to haul in a big pass. And a few times, that's exactly what happened. Major breakdowns, it seems, from the Georgia secondary on Saturday. Kirby Smart was pretty straightforward in his description of exactly how that went. This is what he said in his postgame press conference on Saturday. Here's Kirby on that.
We got to continue to get better. Frustrating, some of the things in the secondary, 50-50 balls. I don't think we won one, maybe one. 50-50 balls out there on the perimeter, and we worked really hard on that and give them credit. They got some good wideouts, and I thought their quarterback gained confidence throughout the game. He made some plays. Early he struggled, and then as the game went on, he made some throws that were good throws, and they beat us on.
So let me just say this for a moment. That even if Georgia needs the sort of shootout-style win to beat Texas, that doesn't mean that defense won't play a role in all of that. Because in the 40-something to 30-something style game or the 30-something to 30-something style game, it still takes defensive plays for your chance to win. You got to get stopped sometime. You've got to get a turnover somehow. You've got to, get some negative plays somehow. You can't just let them march down the field and do whatever. But the sort of game-changing defensive player still has a valuable role, even if Georgia is going to need to win in the sort of mostly offensive-oriented style games that it played against Alabama and other teams seem to always play. You've still got to have the game-changing defensive player. And right now, if we're just being honest, Georgia doesn't have the look of a team that has the true game changer on defense. Or if it does have the game changer on defense, he may be playing a position that, as I've described before, is just one of the less premium positions where your ability to truly impact the game isn't as substantial as it would be if you were playing a different position. Like, for instance, cornerback is supposed to be one of those positions where you can change the game. You can break up passes and slow down somebody else's offense. You can get the turnover. You can win the 50-50 ball. And Georgia right now, despite the fact that it's got talented players who've mostly been playing the cornerback spots, they're just not winning enough of these one-on-one battles. And if you've got somebody who can perhaps win some of those, even if he's not super experienced, it may be just time to let him have a try. And it may just be time to put your best 11 out there, whether they're experienced or not. And, of course, the guy that I'm referencing here is Ellis Robinson. And listen, I won't pretend to know if Robinson should be playing over any of the guys who've been playing. I'm not at practice every day. Even if I was, I probably wouldn't be able to make an accurate evaluation of that. I'm not going to pretend to know more than I do. But we can all judge results, and right now the results aren't good enough. And we know what people told us about Robinson as a prospect coming into UGA. And it may just be time to sort of give him his shot to see if he can kind of win some of the one-on-one battles that Georgia's not winning enough of here right now. Late in the game on Saturday, we did see some of Ellis Robinson get in there, perhaps foreshadowing what we might see more of in the future. And maybe this Saturday against the Longhorns is when that is supposed to happen. This is what Kirby Smart said about Ellis Robinson after the game.
He's had the 2 best weeks of practice that he's had. I thought that the week against Auburn, he really started, like you can hear him talking in walkthroughs. You can hear him communicating. You see him practicing, doing things. And then he had a good week this week in practice. He got better. He competed. He did some good things. And he like you see him understanding the defense. I mean, this offense was very different. So had it been a traditional offense, he probably would have played early in the game, but they have really wide splits. We had to make different checks. They do hurry up. It makes it really tough on communication when you play that kind of game against people. But I am proud of him and his growth and how much he's gotten better, and wished he could have gotten in the game earlier.
So let me sum all this up very simply. Even if I'm correct about Saturday's game, and it's going to have to be a shootout against Texas to win it, you still need game-changing defensive players to get you a stop at some point in time, or get you a turnover at some point, or create a negative play. And this week, moving into all that, you got to identify who those potential game changers on defense might be. And it could very well be that some of your best candidates to be those dudes are maybe players who haven't played a whole lot as of yet. For instance, Ellis Robinson sounds like he's practicing better, turning some heads with coaches during the week, leading into Saturday. Well, this week could be a week to get him ready to go out there and do what some of the Georgia secondary has not really been able to do a lot thus far this season. And that is Around the Doghouse. It's poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And listen, it's going to be a stressful week. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to need my Dr. Pepper very close by, because when I need a little pick-me-up or a little sort of energy boost, Dr. Pepper's always there to provide that for me. It's sort of my little daily treat. I just look forward to it. After the show, transitioning from sort of one thing to the next, get me a little Dr. Pepper and enjoying all of that. It's a great part of game day there as well for any time, right? You just love Dr. Pepper. So make it be a part of your college football weekends there as well. As you're shopping at your local Kroger or wherever you're getting your groceries, pick up some Dr. Pepper, whether it's the Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar, the Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream. People love the really cool varieties of flavor. I drink Diet Dr. Pepper. I still like the regular Dr. Pepper. I like it all. So make sure you check out Dr. Pepper here today, because when it comes to college football and Dr. Pepper, it truly is a pepper thing. So check them out today. Glad to have Dr. Pepper as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. Glad to have Jon Stinchcomb there, too. We'll talk to Jon. In the midst of all that, I'll give you an update on our DawgNation invasion. Speaking of Dr. Pepper, they're going to be a big part of all that. I'll be telling you about that. Hear more coming up there, too. And big recruiting news to get to before the show is done today, too. Interesting update from a guy who just took a visit to UGA. We'll cover all of that and more. But for now, let's get ready to talk to the great former Georgia All-American about all the topics on the table as the Dogs try to get themselves a big win on Saturday. It's Jon Stinchcomb here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I will say hello to Jon Stinchcomb, the great former Georgia All-American. I always love his perspective. Ran to his brother, Matt, calling the game there on Saturday, too. Good to see the other half of the Stinchcomb brother tandem there this past weekend. But, Jon, breakdowns defensively in the second half turned what almost seemed like it was going to be a Georgia, I don't want to say blowout, but comfortable Georgia win into something that was a little bit more nail-biting as the second half kind of played out. How much does that make you concerned about what you're seeing from the Georgia defense right now, particularly the back end with the secondary? What do you think about what Georgia is defensively here at the moment?
Yeah, we have a big enough body of work to truly evaluate this defense, really this entire team. And at times you see flashes. Obviously, there are still playmakers on that defensive side of the ball. Jalen Walker's a stud. I think Ingram Dawkins, you see both of them in your picture, both guys that have made big plays throughout the season. But it's the consistency piece. And really on the back end, more so now than in years past, you feel the losses of attrition into the NFL. 3 draft picks gone, Tyke and Lassiter and Bullard. I think that's being felt. And what you see is guys that are athletic, guys that can move, but sometimes they're out of position, or sometimes they're in a position to make a play and just don't come up with it. So there is concern there. I think just not having Michael, not having Jordan Hall, being at a point now where I don't know what the statistics say. I'm not a statistic guy, but the amount of pressure that Georgia brings, it has to be up from where we've been. And I think if you're able to generate pressure with just 4 guys, then maybe you can help out that back end more. But because we haven't been able to do that, you put our secondary in positions where they're playing a lot of one-on-one battles. And again, Mississippi State specifically in the second half, and even against Alabama, there were some one-on-one battles that we just didn't win, and we were out of position at times. So it's a concern. You're so far into the season. I heard you talk about Ellis. You'd love to see him come along and possibly be that answer, but I don't think there's a quick fix remedy, whether it's a singular player or just development of players. It's a process with all of this, and you have to put these guys in positions to succeed. And I think we're trying to do that, but it certainly has been a transition from what we've known to what we can expect consistently this season.
So I'm going to get out over my skis here for a moment and talk about something I don't really know all that well, but I have a little bit of a hunch about. I think one of the things that Kirby Smart's been really good at Georgia is managing the locker room and kind of managing the egos and sort of making Georgia football feel a little bit like a collective. I don't mean NIL collective. I mean a group of players who, for the most part, were equal among each other, whereas a lot of other football teams seem to be a lot more about the hierarchy. This guy's just better than you, and so therefore he's going to play more than you, and you'll be lucky to play at all. And Kirby, for the most part, is sort of, the best that I can tell, kind of sidestep some of that. Georgia plays a lot of guys. They rotate pretty freely. They have respect for experience. Young players have to earn their way into the lineup. And for the most part, that's okay, because by the time you do, you're on your way to becoming a great draft pick. So financially, it ends up working out for you. So what do you really have to complain about? That's what the era of 2021 and 2022 are all about. But it just sort of seems like we're in a different era now. And, you know, the idea of we're going to keep locker room chemistry by making sure that everybody is sort of happy and everybody sort of has a role. John, I don't know how much you can do that anymore. And it could just be, to use a guy like Ellis Robinson, for instance, it could just be that he may have to cut the line and play over some guys that you were really glad didn't transfer. And you had to really tell them, hey, if you stay here, we're going to give you your shot. But it could just be that maybe an Ellis deserves a look over guys that you're glad to have a part of your program, because maybe he just has a chance to be better. And even though he's young and even though he's experienced, that maybe he's just got a chance to go out and win some of the 50-50 balls, defensively, that Georgia seems like it's not winning enough of here right now. And as I said before, I don't know if I'm right about any of this. I'm humble enough to certainly assume that maybe I'm wrong about Ellis's ability or about, the real nature of what it's like to manage those, significant egos of very talented players in a locker room. But it seems like one way or another that college football is changing, and I'm suspicious that Georgia's going to probably need to kind of change its operation somewhat too in order to keep pace with what the sport looks like right now. Am I off base on that?
I think you're hitting on two topics. One is, in years past, this Georgia team has been so deep that there's not been a significant drop between the number one guy and the number two guy. So when you rotate in, you still have a high performing player in the position, whether it's secondary or otherwise. I don't think that's the case right now. One, I don't think, and I think Kirby's hit on this a number of times in his press conference, is depth is an issue. So when you rotate guys, we see a drop off, and part of it's been health. I know that's the case offensive line wise, which it is subject to that same evaluation. But on the other aspect of what you're hitting on is Julian and Daniel and Dalen. They were the young guys that were getting some reps in years past that now it's their turn. It's their chance to be that number one guy that they've earned. And I don't think we've seen the progression or there is a drop off from last year to this year in our quote unquote number ones. So as they take the field, you have to know that this isn't the same secondary that Georgia has fielded in years past. It isn't that same level that you can put them in one-on-one situations and have the confidence that they're going to win more than their fair share of those battles. It has proven to be not the case this season, that in those 50-50 balls and those one-on-one situations in years past, well, you can't play that game anymore. In years past is no longer a good metric for this team, because this is a new year. These are new players, and there needs to be an adjustment, because the same one-on-one battles that were won are not being won right now. So there needs to be some adjustment there. And I think that's across the board. I think I'm going to flip to an area of strength, if you will, BA, talking about the offensive line.
Yeah.
In years past, you could rotate your sixth, seventh, eighth man into that rotation and feel like there's very little drop off. What we've seen is that there's a significant amount of drop off. And if I'm being a fair evaluator, the starting five has not lived up to the billing. And that, I think, applies across the board, secondary included. That's why Ellis Robinson's being mentioned, is because not only is there, can we find our answer in the depth, but it's the reason why that question is being asked is because our primaries, our number ones, aren't that elite or really high performing player that we've been used to in the past 2, 3, 4 years. So I think it's an adjustment in expectations, that the standard from which we've known for Georgia, it's different this year. That this Georgia team, there's a big enough body of work to evaluate this team now, and it's a good team. It's not on that same level of some of those national championship contending teams that we've seen in years past. And maybe it doesn't need to be. Maybe that's the case for all the other top 10 teams across the league. But what we know and what our eyes and what the film tells us is that there is a difference in overall performance between the Georgia teams in the past 3-4 years and what this team is currently showing.
So you started with the conversation with the offense. Let me go there for a moment. It's kind of a mixed bag, I guess. Carson Beck has kind of a record-setting day throwing the football, but he does throw a couple of picks. Arian Smith had a career-high day as well, another 100-yard-plus game for him, but he also probably had a couple of miscues. Georgia seemed to be successful through the air, but the running game probably was not where it was against Auburn. How confident are you in the Georgia offense at the moment?
You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of a spring game where there's huge plays and big numbers, and candidly, there is a difference in talent between Georgia and Mississippi State. I think that was on display, but it's almost like your ones versus twos, where at times you see the flashes of the twos. You're like, ooh, well, maybe down the road, that's where Mississippi State is. Their ceiling is lower than Georgia's, but it's the inconsistency that I think is the biggest concern. And Georgia was the superior talent. You look at Beck's numbers and you're going, man, those are some huge numbers. But you also saw flashes of real vulnerability. And when you play more talented teams, I think that's what the concern is. It's not, can Georgia score 40-plus points? Well, they did that. But you also saw some chinks in the armor. And when it makes a big difference when you're playing a Mississippi State versus a Texas. You make those same mistakes, and they can be backbreakers. So I thought Carson had one of his better games, and want to commend him, because I certainly have been if I'm being open and honest, a little bit of a detractor of his game up to this point, and saying that he needs to perform better for this Georgia offense. And at times we saw that. We saw some really good balls coming from the quarterback position, and his mobility in the pocket seemed to be smarter choices overall. But then you have the two interceptions, one in a highly contested ball right there at the goal line, and then an unfortunate early interception that I think could probably happen to just about any quarterback. With that said, the onus is always a lot higher on that marquee spot. So I think if you're evaluating fairly this entire offense, you're going, man, there are some pieces that are being missed up front, and there are some adjustments and expectations and what can be expressed and realized on the edges. So gone are the days of the Brock Bowers and the Ladd McConkey, and more is being put on Carson to distribute the ball and let each guy kind of show what they do best.
So, John, in light of all of that, I've said that the path to victory for Georgia against Texas almost has to be a shootout. That when you look at what college football is now, Ohio State, Oregon, the latest example of that here this week, for both Georgia and Texas, it just sort of seems like the Georgia game against Alabama, Texas's biggest games a year ago, these are games that are just played with a combined total of 60-something, if not 70 points. I don't see how Saturday's game, if it's a Georgia win, is anything other than that. I used to always say, hey, a big game, if you're Georgia, you got to try to find a way to win it 30-something to 20-something. I don't think that's what Saturday is. I think Texas is going to score at least 30. I really do. And if Georgia wins, they're going to have to score in excess of that to get it done. Do you disagree with that? Do you see this playing out as anything other than one of these very modern shootout-style games on Saturday?
Not this year. In years past, you could argue that the defense would be able to, limit and cap what any offense they faced is capable of, with few exceptions. But I do think that where our defense is at right now, it's probably unrealistic to keep your high-performing offenses limited to below that 30 mark. And that puts a much bigger onus on the offense. And I would struggle to see the consistency up to this point that would be able to match that. And I'm not, I'm certainly not saying that it's an automatic loss here this weekend. I think Georgia just needs to play its best ball. And speaking from the horse's mouth themselves, we haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen a complete game being put together. And it's the consistency in these big games that matters most. You can overcome the highs and lows against a lesser opponent. And this is another one of those marquee games where you can't have those stretches. The stretches that you had early against Alabama, or the stretch that you had late against Mississippi State, they can be real backbreakers when you're talking about a well-rounded, talented team like Texas has. So, Landon Humphreys and Dom Lovett, and what's concerning just as much as anything is the number of drop balls that you saw on Saturday. And there's still some miscommunications and missed assignments offensively. You can't have any of those. And so you're almost hoping for an anomaly type performance from this Georgia offense for them to come out with that victory, just because we haven't seen the consistency up to this point. And you're hoping that they can finally put it together when the light's the brightest.
I want to ask you about one more thing before we say goodbye to you today. Before I do that, remind folks, still a chance for you to be a part of our DawgNation Invasion tailgate. In fact, I'm still hearing from people, even my own personal life, over the course of the last couple of days, plans being made, folks going to be in Austin. They want to be a part of the big event, the Friday night pregame party, the big tailgate there on Saturday there as well, perhaps even still some limited inventory when it comes to hotel rooms there too. All of that can be found DawgNation.com/tailgate. If you want to be a part of the DawgNation Invasion, you can get more information, DawgNation.com/tailgate. In fact, learn about how you can even get the limited supply of DawgNation Invasion T-shirts that we have on hand for all that there as well. Our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips are helping power those for us here this year, and we're ready to have a great time. We want you to be a part of it. The big pregame tailgate as DawgNation takes over Austin. They've tried everything they can to keep us out. F1 race, all the travel challenges, and yet Georgia fans will not be denied. They're going to be there. We're hosting them. It's going to be a DawgNation invasion. We want you to be a part of it. And if you want to get your tickets for the tailgate, the Friday night pregame party, or to find out about the chance at some travel accommodations too, assuming supply is still available on that, and to get a DawgNation Invasion t-shirt, simply go to DawgNation.com/tailgate. With our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips, we'll see you for DawgNation Invasion this weekend there in Austin as the Dogs try to take down the Longhorns in what could be a wild affair indeed. All right, so John, let me finish with this, and you may not even be aware of this, but Saturday, a couple of Georgia fans, or a handful of Georgia fans, certainly noticed something in the stadium. And as somebody who's a pretty big stakeholder in UGA, I'm just sort of curious about your opinion about this. Let me read you a couple of things here as it relates to what was a lot of empty seats in the stadium on Saturday in the student sections, especially the 300 level, which is one of the upper levels where students are sometimes located. Starting with our friends at the UGA Spike Squad, obviously those who get dressed up and get down there in the front with the shoulder pads, things like that. They write, frat boys, sorority girls, y'all are supposed to be some of the best fans we have. Instead, you're showing up late and you can't even make it to halftime. This is embarrassing. The Spike Squad account goes on to say, be better or y'all need to stop getting reserved seats when nearly all of our members, they mean the Spike Squad members, are stuck with split packages, meaning Georgia students who don't get tickets to every game. The Spike Squad criticizing the Greek community for having those, reserved sections and not taking full advantage of all of that. Even non-students, Chelsea, who's a big part, been in our audience for a long time and has kind of written to us on a number of issues before and come to some of our events. Let me show you what Chelsea had to say. And this picture, by the way, if you're watching on video, comes from Allison Mastrangelo from Channel 2. So for some context here, what Chelsea Shadowins writes is, in response to your comments in the post-game show this week about empty student sections, we went out to the 100-level concourse during halftime Saturday, and we saw students leaving in droves, she said. It's not the paying fans, it's the students. But what can you do? That's what Chelsea writes, and I think that's a pretty fair point. So, John, the issue here was, listen, I've been going to Georgia games for a long time. In the Kirby Smart era, I have never seen as many empty student seats as there were on Saturday. The 300 level of the student section was mostly empty. Some of the West End Zone student seating was pretty sparsely attended there as well. And I'm talking about in years past, even for like the Austin P games and things like that, for the most part, the stadium, to my eyes, was usually quite full. Saturday, not full at all. The fans who were, they were making plenty of noise. I would give them credit for that. But the empty seats, it seems like a problem. And as Chelsea writes, I'm not quite so sure what you do about that. John, what do you make of such large numbers of empty seats on Saturday in the student section?
Oh, it's super frustrating, and I think it's an embarrassing aspect of our stands and our stadium and our fan base, specifically our students. And the issue comes with it's always a balance. And I think the University of Georgia and the athletic department has been very strategic in making tickets available for all students, and it's been a big push. You're competing for a national championship on an annual basis, and every student wants to attend those games. And now you get to this point, and it's like we have bent over backwards to make these concessions to make sure that if you're a current student, that you have access to these games. And now it's almost like no good deed goes unpunished. And now you look at the stands and they're not filled, because those same students that have been clamoring and been protesting of like, hey, we're paying students here and we can't even go to the games. We've changed some of the rules and regulations and accessibility points for the students so that every student can have this opportunity. And because of that access, now you look at the stands and there's empty seats. And that is beyond frustrating, especially when you look at the secondary ticket market and the increase in ticket prices for paying fans, and they're going, hey, these come at a premium. So I understand if students are saying, hey, this is my 4 years where I want to be able to go and support my team and I need access to that. I can respect that. But if these provisions are made, if these seats are set aside to provide those opportunities and you're not taking advantage of it, it's really frustrating. And I think there was a great response to Coach Smart's challenge at the last home game of calling out fans and saying they could do better. And I think they responded on Saturday. I thought it was louder and they were more engaged. With that said, it's a little bit of a black eye when you look out and there's so many empty seats. And it wasn't just the student section. I think there were some fans that did leave early that weren't undergrads at the University of Georgia. So that's part of the equation. But the lion's share does fall at the feet of the students in those empty seats, not only those that weren't ever claimed, but a number of those by middle of third quarter that are empty. And this is an SEC game. This isn't one of those low-level opponents where you go, well, I kind of get it. No, you don't get that excuse. This is a big-time opportunity for Georgia to go out there and compete in the SEC and show that Sanford Stadium is special, and we kind of dropped the ball a little bit there.
I think it's a fair critique, John. I really do, and I'm glad I asked you about that here today. John, we appreciate your time. Next time we speak, boy, I hope we're talking about a win for Georgia against Texas because, man, oh, man, wouldn't that be a lot of fun, but obviously a very challenging path to getting all that done. So appreciate your insight. Hope you have a great week. We'll look forward to having you back here again very soon on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
Appreciate it, BA. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So let me get into the weeds for like a couple of seconds here on what John was just talking about. And I don't know if this is a solution or not, but I hate to turn this into like sort of a back in my day ... conversation, but back in my day, student tickets sort of went to whoever wanted them the most. You know, even when my brother was in school, like this would be early 2000s, I remember, you know, they would just go, like, get in line. They would sort of camp out, kind of like Krzyzewskiville for, like, Duke basketball. And if you sort of slept all night out there in the parking lot, then you were first in line to get the student tickets when they went on sale. And so, therefore, you got sort of the best tickets. This is sort of like in the dark ages prior to, like, scanning your ID to get into the stadium or anything like that. So the people who wanted the student tickets the most, they got them. If they wanted to sell them to somebody else, then somebody else could use those student tickets. And to my eyes and ears, when you're talking about the stadium, that works pretty well for an environment. Now, it's not, I guess, fair to so-and-so, little Lord Fauntleroy, who, got a 1600 on his SAT and all of a sudden comes to Georgia and now expects to, get all the tickets to all the games, but doesn't want to go wait in line to get them. I'm guessing he probably doesn't like that too much. But to the fans who, like, grew up dreaming of going to UGA, dreaming of being a UGA student, and will do whatever it takes to be in the stadium, well, they're going to find a way to get in. And honestly, those are the people that you want in the stadium. And so somehow, some way, you got to try to find a way to, like, get the rabid fan students back in there and make it, I guess, a little less fair. I mean, this idea we're going to have split ticket packages and everybody's going to get a chance to get some tickets. Not every student loves Georgia football equally. They just don't. And, I used the word hierarchy earlier. I'm in favor of sort of a hierarchy of the fans who want to be there the most being the ones who are in there. I'm talking about the students in this particular case. So probably not an easy thing to solve because it's just not. But nonetheless, probably something worth paying attention to. Now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And boy, I tell you, I love thinking about our Dog Nation cruise coming up in April. And I will tell you this. I was having a couple conversations with people on Saturday. One of the things I realized I have not talked about enough when it comes to Utopia of the Seas and the great things we get a chance to do when we're on our Dog Nation cruise. It did occur to me that I probably haven't done enough to explain that one of the things that makes a Dog Nation cruise different than any other Royal Caribbean cruise vacation I have a chance to take is we do have specially themed Dog Nation events you get a chance to be a part of. I'm talking about trivia contests and really fun, like, multimedia video style experiences where you're kind of immersed into the culture of Georgia football. We work really hard to make our DawgNation events some of the best parts of a DawgNation cruise. And we want you to be a part of all of that with us. So Jessica Slater is a wonderful travel agent. She can tell you all about it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Book yourself on the DawgNation cruise. Be a part of all the great things that Royal Caribbean has to offer. What a great time to be taking a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. All right, so let's go cruise around the SEC for a moment. I'm going to kind of bounce through like 4 of the top games for the weekend, and we'll come back and do some more of those tomorrow because I'm telling you, once again, another weekend of just unbelievable entertainment. Like, how good was college football this weekend? So good. It never disappoints, and this weekend, once again, it just delivered in such a big way. Although one game that did not quite live up to what I wanted to be was the speaking of shootouts, the Red River shootout between Oklahoma and Texas. We sort of thought, man, if Oklahoma could just do something to make this a challenge, if Oklahoma could kind of just be a little bit of a stumbling block here, even if Texas eventually wins, you know, make them play for 60 minutes, make them fight a little bit. Perhaps that helps Georgia going into next week. But the truth is, if we're being honest, it sort of works out the opposite. Texas gets the easy win. They were clearly coasting for a good portion of this game. Georgia probably had to expend more energy against Mississippi State, probably had to show more on film. And whatever advantage we thought Georgia could get from playing the worst team in the SEC while Texas was out there playing a rival, doesn't happen. By the time the season's done, maybe Oklahoma is one of the worst teams in the SEC. But either way, Texas wins easily, to its credit. I will say this, that if you go back and look carefully, you know, Brent Venables is a really sharp defensive mind. Last year, did some things that worked defensively against Texas. In the early stages of this game, you almost thought you might get, a little bit of a stand-up from Oklahoma. They did some stuff defensively against Texas to begin the game, and it worked. I think they got a couple of sacks on Ewers, for instance, who is back from injury. So maybe there's something for Georgia to look into on that, how all of that worked. But obviously, whatever success the Sooners were having, it was short-lived. I think that Texas is a real football team. I really do, and I've felt this now for a couple of years, that you can say that Texas historically has been overrated, and it has been. And you can say their fans are annoying, and I think they probably are. I think this is a team that does have an inflated sense of itself, no doubt about that. And I think some of the way in which they interacted with a lot of the other Big 12 members while they were in that league was, to put it mildly, grotesque. But Texas, I do not believe on Saturday is going to make it easy for you. I think they're going to score at least 30 points against Georgia. And I think that Georgia's got to find a way to get more than that to win. And we're going to hammer that point over and over here this week. Speaking of 30-something to 30-something shootouts, that's how Oregon beat Ohio State on Saturday. This, to me, was fascinating. And I got to give Oregon a lot of credit because I said going into it, I didn't think they could get this done. Based on the way they had played, I didn't see any hint at victory. Well, we're wrong. We own it. And I'm going to own that full-throatedly. That I did not see anything from Oregon coming into this that led me to believe they were going to be able to win this game, and they did. And y'all, this was a very big win for Dan Lanning. We said that Lanning really hadn't gotten the signature win. You can no longer say that now. Lanning's a guy we like, and Lanning can now say, hey, you know, in my first year in the Big Ten against the prestige program, heritage program in the Big Ten, we beat them. Now, very good chance these two teams play again here this year, and maybe Ohio State wins that rematch, maybe. But all you can know right now is they were ready for this. They were able to get it done. A lot of people talking about the 12th minute on the field penalty. They're late in the game. The idea that may have been intentional, kind of taking it back to, I guess, the old Bears defensive coordinator, Eagles head coach Buddy Ryan was maybe famous for doing that at one point in time. I don't know. Whether that was intentional or not, Lanning seemed to pitch himself a pretty good game there on Saturday night and getting the win. All of a sudden now a much bigger spotlight goes on Ryan Day for what he's not doing in a lot of these really big games. Our buddy Dari Payro brought that up as a part of R.S. Andrews and the R.S. Andrews Go with the Flow show this past Friday. The Day's record against sort of major opponents is kind of abysmal. And that kind of remains true there once again. And listen, On the one hand, Ohio State's performance here, now taking a loss after being the most hyped team of the offseason, is a reminder that the prediction we made before the season began is likely to come true. I don't think anybody's going undefeated. If Georgia beats Texas on Saturday, that wipes out the entirety of the SEC. Oregon wins this game. I think they're due to take a loss at some point in time themselves. Dylan Gabriel, their quarterback, for instance, has struggled enough that you think that somebody could get them at some point in time. And now the vaunted Ohio State Buckeyes, well, they've lost there as well. I just think we're heading for a season where everybody has at least one loss. And so, therefore, when it comes to Georgia, you're not comparing Georgia to previous versions of itself. You're comparing Georgia to the other teams in the present tense conversation of college football right now. And to that end, Georgia may still compare pretty favorably depending on how they play in these weeks here coming up. However, don't let Ohio State off the hook quite so easily, because for those of us who did spend the entire summer having the preseason conversation, it is amazing how much hype they had for the supposed $20 million roster. We think that the ESPN style of college football coverage has tried to NBA-ify college football. There is a way in which the NBA is discussed on ESPN, who was obviously all in on the NBA. There's a way in which the NBA gets discussed where all of a sudden the off-season matters more than the in-season. You know, the old Woj bomb stuff of who's going to get traded and who's going to form a super team and who wants out of so-and-so place and who's going to do this and who's going to do that. The sort of off-season soap opera drama has overtaken the on-field, or I should say on-court product. You know, stars regularly sit out, load management, they rest themselves because the regular season has been diminished because the off-season gets so much attention. ESPN has tried to cover college football in much the same way. The hype around Ohio State was an example of that. And after getting all that attention the preseason, we're not even halfway home in October, and they've already lost a game. It not only makes the Buckeyes look bad, it not only makes Ryan Day look bad, it makes everyone who tried to push this narrative of the supposed best team in the last 10 years in college football, whatever it's supposed to be, it makes them look pretty foolish too. Buckeyes may still win the national championship, but the level of attention they got preseason based on this result clearly shows that attention to be unwarranted. And I think that has to be mentioned. Let me also say a couple of other things here real quick, too. South Carolina is an example of what exists in the modern SEC right now. At a time in which no one's perfect, but teams can be good, South Carolina is a little bit of an example of that. They've got some real offensive struggles. You know, Lenore Sellers is probably the worst quarterback in the SEC and maybe one of the worst starting quarterbacks in recent SEC memory, perhaps. But, man, the Gamecocks can really do some stuff defensively. Dylan Stewart's a terrific player. And they gave Alabama everything they wanted again on Saturday. And as weird as it sounds, since the game against Georgia in which Alabama won, the truth is I think that Alabama has actually looked worse since then than Georgia has. And that, you know, all the people who said maybe I feel better about Georgia post-Alabama, I don't know if that turns out to be true or not, but what we told you immediately after that game is that no one was talking at the time about the struggles of Alabama to even allow the Georgia comeback to occur. And the fact that Georgia got back in that game without playing really all that excellently to do so, we have seen that from Alabama since then. To have the bad taste of defeat in your mouth and come back home and still not be able to play better than that as a 3-touchdown favorite, in excess of a 3-touchdown favorite, these are very interesting times there in Tuscaloosa for sure. A very different version of Alabama here right now. And then finally, we'll mention this. LSU wins an absolute thriller. Talking about shootouts. The game against Ole Miss turned out to be that way. We got this one right because we said for LSU that had won convincingly at South Carolina to then turn around 1 week later and also win at LSU, that's the kind of thing that would be reserved only for like the best teams in the country. And clearly Ole Miss is not that, and now you see proof of that. This is an Ole Miss team that's already lost twice, and Lane Kiffin once again, whose entire career since you've been given to him, is also kind of having to deal with, you know, are you ever going to win a big game? are you ever going to be anything as a coach more than just a social media personality? And it's not obvious. The answer to that question is yes. And much the same way back in 2022, Kiffin spent most of the second half of the season wondering if he was going to get the Auburn job, and the Ole Miss performance suffered because of that. You have to wonder if the same thing's happening right now with the potential opening there at Florida. Or maybe he's just not that good of a coach, and maybe Ole Miss, as transfer-laden as they are, just isn't that good of a team. They'll still be dangerous week to week, but for a team that started off the year ranked, inside the top 10 for sure, if not in the top 6, top 7, top 8, whatever it was they were, supposed to be able to make the college football playoff because of a easy and favorable schedule. As it turns out, not easy and favorable enough for them to even make it to the midpoint of October without suffering their second loss. So credit to LSU. They remain unbeaten in the Brian Kelly era when playing at Death Valley at night. But let's also acknowledge what a massive disappointment Ole Miss is turning out to be. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, I want to get to a recruiting note here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, let me also give a shout out to our friends at Lassiter Tractor here. I love having Lassiter Tractor as a part of DawgNation Daily because I love what they do for some hardworking folks out there, for people who are, in many cases, putting food on our table. I'm talking about our, local farmers in state or just people who are kind of taking care of the land. I live now in kind of a place where a lot of the people around me have these big, beautiful, just property, piece of property, multi-acre type thing. And I don't have that much acreage, but I see a lot of people who do. And I'm always thinking, man, that just makes the world look prettier and it looks better to have this beautiful land all around you. And Lassiter Tractor helps take care of that land because they are South Georgia's hometown John Deere dealer. And they've been that way since 1956. So if you need a Series 1, Series 2, Series 3, Series 4, depending on how much acreage you have, how much you got to take care of, our folks there at Lassiter Tractor can give you the right John Deere piece of equipment to go along with all of that. And they can also customize any of these compact utility tractors with the attachments that you need, like the loader bucket or the rotary cutter or so much more. So please visit your local Lassiter Tractor dealer for your next compact utility tractor, the unmistakable John Deere green color and the great recognized brand that's such a leader in this space and has been for such a long time. Find them online. It's LassiterEQ.com. That's LASSETER, LassiterEQ.com for more on that. Now, speaking of the great state of Georgia, this is one of those years in which obviously talent-rich from a high school football perspective. That remains true here this year, and we've had this name circled for a long time. It's the five-star defensive lineman Elijah Griffin from out of Savannah. Griffin took his official visit to Georgia here this weekend. I think the thought was that if this goes well, things might be looking pretty good for UGA. So perhaps maybe the next step and all of that. Fresh off the official visit, Griffin makes a little bit of an announcement here saying he will be announcing his commitment Friday, October 18th. That's this upcoming Friday at 1:20 p.m. at the Savannah Christian Preparatory School at the Eckberg Gym. Hashtag Raider Nation, he says, and he says anybody is welcome to come by and be a part of that. You better believe that DawgNation is going to be watching this announcement very close as you head towards the weekend. A lot of folks heading towards Austin around that same time, but the Griffin story on Friday will be a very big one to follow there too. And certainly good news that he puts it out there that he is getting ready to make his commitment announcement, and perhaps after that official visit to Georgia, you're thinking this could maybe be good news for the Dog. Stay close to Jeff Sintel and DawgNation this week, and we'll find out more about all of that. Also, one more quick shout-out to give you before we get ready to go. Speaking of DawgNation on game day, how about our great folks there at Jittery Joe's? So many of you have made it a part of your game day staple of activities to stop by and see them at their downtown location. As Kaylee Manziel does the DawgNation game day pregame show 2 hours prior to every game right there from Jittery Joe's. And we want you to enjoy the great coffee offered by Jittery Joe's there as well, because Jittery Joe's and the Dogs are geared up for the 2024 season, and they're obviously offering some really cool stuff right now. Those commemorative cans that celebrate the great moments in Georgia football history, including the 2 recent national championships. They're offering that as a great collector's item. I have one of those on my set here in our studio each and every day right now. I love looking at that. And I love the Jittery Joe's coffee. It's been voted Athens' best coffee for 14 years running. And it's been locally owned and roasted for the last 30 years. So this is a venerable brand making great coffee. and a big part of the Georgia Bulldogs and a big part of DawgNation there as well. So make sure you download the Jittery Joe's app on your mobile device. You get half off your first drink, and you can also skip the line there as well, which is a really cool thing. So visit jitteryjoes.com for more on all of that. I always love going to the Bethlehem location, but there's all kinds of great locations all throughout the Athens area. jitteryjoes.com for a lot more on that. Long show for us again. I guess they're all long these days. A lot going on around UGA, including a golden shoe to give out here today. Georgia gets the win on Saturday. Marv Author, who's been kind of a prolific golden shoe submitter as of late, celebrates that. He says, congrats to the Georgia Bulldogs, their big win over Mississippi State. Huge shout out to DawgNation for turning up the energy and making Sanford Stadium rock. Let's keep the momentum rolling into next week. He gives you the graphic here, kind of AI style, release the beast. And yes, indeed, the fans who were there, not all the seats filled, those who were there making a lot of noise, and Georgia doing some things really well. And in the midst of talking about some areas of improvement, there were some things to celebrate, and Marv Author does a good job of celebrating that, so we will give him a golden shoe for his troubles. Lousy, stinking Gators. We'll talk more about them tomorrow. Once again, they found a way to keep it close against Tennessee, to their credit, I guess. Not keeping it close against Georgia, though. Haven't beaten the Dogs in 1,437 days. We love that. It's our Gator Hater Updater here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll see all of you back here again tomorrow. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, we are going to get all of your comments here, find out what's on your mind, and react to the game from this past Saturday, and perhaps most importantly, the big look ahead to what comes next with the Longhorns looming. And if you're going to Texas, hope you'll join us for our DawgNation Invasion, and hopefully you're as excited about all of that as I am. As I said before, you don't have to look very far to find Georgia fans who don't think Georgia's going to win this game. They may prove to be right, but the preponderance of the negativity is not in itself particularly predictive, because all the big Georgia wins have always come with no shortage of naysayers in the lead up to the game. So do with that what you will. All right, let's dive in here and see what's going on. Let me go back to Facebook for a minute here and see how they're doing. Joseph Kennedy says, Texas ain't a must-win, but the rest will be. Yeah, I mean, you definitely, hold on one second. You definitely don't want to be, as I said about Ole Miss, if we're going to criticize Ole Miss for having 2 losses, in basically early October, Georgia, listen, if it's the preseason number 1 team and it's already back against the wall by October 19th, that's not successful. I don't care how tough the schedule is. That's not successful. And if Georgia were to, heaven forbid, miss the playoff or be in a kind of playoff situation where they had a real, kind of arduous task of having to go on the road, for instance, or something along those lines. I mean, it is possible for Georgia to have an unsuccessful season. It absolutely is. And so that's absolutely true. So as the preseason number 1, I don't care if Texas is actually the number 1 now and the point spread favorite. It's a game that Georgia's supposed to win. And so the fact they haven't played particularly great up until now, they just got to find a different level for Saturday. And I think it's possible they could. Let's see what else. Steve Banks says if we lose to Texas, we won't be in the SEC championship. I guess that's probably true. I mean, the honest truth is, mathematically, I have a hard time figuring all that out. I'm not being sarcastic towards you. I'm just being sarcastic in general. You got to find 2 teams playing the SEC championship. So now you may say, well, Alabama will have head-to-head over Georgia. Perhaps that's the case. But, it's not a guarantee they run the table the rest of the way. Maybe they do, but it's not guaranteed they will. So, if Georgia – it'd be crowded enough that maybe somebody goes at least 7-1 and 2 teams go 7-1 in conference. Maybe that's the case. But I'm not to a point yet where I can say anything is settled. I mean, if Texas beats Georgia, they're clearly in the driver's seat, and it's simply a matter of what else is happening around them. But that what else is happening around them is actually pretty hard to sift through here right now. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina says, don't look now, but all of a sudden your former dark horse favorite Texas A&M has a very easy schedule till Texas at the end of the season. Yeah, they really do. It's one of the interesting stories that, Elko's clearly doing a good job there. Their win total to begin the year was already 8.5, so they were kind of already sort of near the upper third of the SEC, and now they're figuring some stuff out, and as you said, pretty favorable for them the rest of the way. So if we're having the conversation, well, who could be in the SEC championship? What if Texas and Texas A&M end up playing in back-to-back weeks? That would be crazy, but possible. Marshall Fleming says, I really think we're going to handle Texas on Saturday. They get rid of the ball very fast. 90% of their passes are less than 10 yards. He says, tailor-made for a quirky three-man rush, drop 8. We always beat these offense big. I believe they bring Manning in after we're up 3 touchdowns. Wow, that's quite a prediction there from Marshall. Quite a prediction there indeed. Don Williams says, I hope we see Ellis Robinson starting. Maybe you will. Maybe you will, or at least playing early in the game and getting his chance. Johnny Surfdog says, I don't know what to expect from Kentucky and Florida. He says, Florida actually looks fairly strong, and UK is up and down. Yeah, I mean, obviously one of the more interesting results from Saturday was Vanderbilt. I mean, this is a hard thing to do. After the emotional win against Alabama, to then go on the road and they didn't win again. Like, that's really impressive from Vanderbilt. Very impressive. But to your point about Kentucky, I mean, Florida has somehow kind of always had Tennessee's number. And they gave themselves every chance to win on the road again on Saturday. Something tells me we may see a little bit of a bounce back from Kentucky there in that spot. Maybe. We'll see. Jonathan Aaron on kind of what allegedly happened with Kirby Smart near the end of the game. Listen, I saw where one of the, I guess, UGA sites tried to make a big deal about that. I didn't see much there that led me to believe that to be some, huge egregious thing. I really didn't. It just sort of seemed like something that couple of seconds on video perhaps made look different than the actual context of it was. I think that, people love their social media clicks, right? And if you have a chance to, if you have a chance to even make what may be a, false accusation, if it gets you social media clicks, some people are just going to want to do it. And so I think from that standpoint, more has been made of that than probably deserves to be. George on Tap, referencing, kind of one of the old stories in the past about this. Yeah, this was not anywhere near that same category. Of course, the sort of, social media clout chasers are going to try to make it be that way. But, some of these people doing that are the same people who've had to apologize for things before. Let's Go Dog says, I'm not mad at, to me, there just wasn't much there. Now, of course, opposing fans are going to grab hold of anything they can just because that's what they do. But no, I did not think there was much there. I did not. And I don't think, frankly, anyone else is either. This was a big deal on Saturday night on social media because short video clips on Saturday night do very well on social media. People are watching a lot of college football. They don't see everything. And so the little short video clips that you put up on social media almost always do well. And so therefore some people are going to just put that stuff up there and try to get what they can out of that, even if someone else's reputation is harmed in the process, perhaps unfairly. Laura Kay says, in a sorority back in the early 2000s, we weren't given tickets. Basically a lottery for some games and camp out in line for others. I only got one game my freshman year. We lived for game days. So that's interesting, Laura. I've heard a little bit of a version of this, too, that some people have said that what the Spike Squad said about the Greeks getting, full priority for like full seasons was not as true as maybe they've suggested it was. And it sounds like, Laura, you're the exact kind of Georgia fan student that we would have wanted to be in the stadium. I mean, the people who were willing to stand in line to go get those tickets, and the people who were willing to go out and do that. It sounds like that's who you really want to be there. And obviously, I know it's frustrating because the demand outstrips the supply by a large, large margin, for sure. For sure. But I appreciate you weighing in, Laura. I do. Let's see what else. KC says the Texas A&M still has to play LSU in Texas. Yeah, I don't put LSU in the same category of Texas in terms of the difficulty of game. Now, Texas is a very tough opponent for Texas A&M. But remember, the only loss for the Aggies right now is out of conference Notre Dame. So it's not a guarantee they beat LSU, but that's not some team you have to be all that much afraid of here right now. Their win on Saturday notwithstanding. So I think the point about A&M is what they could be record-wise when they play Texas. And it could be they don't even do that either. But I think that's the point of how interesting of a category they could potentially put themselves into. Bulldog 22-42-41 says that Kirby wasn't paying attention, but you'd be losing your mind if the other team's coach pushed a Georgia player. Maybe so. I don't know. We don't – I've never had a hard time finding content to discuss. Never have. So we just don't go out of our way on stuff like that very much. I don't know. We don't grab every piece of low-hanging fruit that's out there. We just never needed that. So, if you feel differently about that situation than I do, you have every right to. I'm certainly not in a position to tell you that you're wrong. My reaction to that was I sort of snoozed. It did not really strike me as all that interesting. Listen, there's also a lot of testosterone on the football field. Guys are, they're colliding with each other on every single play, and they're screaming on the sideline. I have a pretty high tolerance for aggression on a football field. I do. Now, we also know examples of it going too far, and sometimes, George Pickens is the guy that I love when he was at Georgia. Very entertained by George, one of the most entertaining players that Georgia's probably had. What he did was, I'm not a huge NFL guy, but what was like 2 Sundays ago, 2 weekends ago, whatever it was, or maybe it was Monday Night Football. Honestly, I don't even know. That's probably taking it too far. Grabbing the face mask and stuff like that. That's probably taking it too far. But overall, I have a pretty high tolerance for aggression on a football field. I am not one who's looking to feminize football necessarily. Let's see what else. Combat Engineer says we need to be more disciplined on defense. Yeah, probably true. I don't quite know what you do with that too, because it's like, so if I'm trying to get to the quarterback and I accidentally grab his face mask, okay, well, I should probably be more, and I think Kirby even kind of talked about this. I should probably be more disciplined, but also, I don't know, it's like, that sort of seems like bad luck in one respect. Kirby kind of got it. Was it Jalen Walker who had the roughing the passer penalty? I sort of thought that was a little ticky-tack. Kirby kind of got on Walker for doing it, but at the same time, it's like, man, he's just trying to get to the quarterback. I think one of the problems that Georgia has is that they're just getting to the quarterback so infrequently that, the sort of fighting, scratching, and clawing you have to do to get there is kind of creating some, opportunities and penalties, I guess. I'm not sure. Let me go back to DawgNation.com for a minute. Savannah Bryan brings up what is, I believe, an accurate point, because I know this has been true for a long time. He says, it seems like the 300 student section is always sparse because a lot of these kids cram into the 100 section next to the band. If you look at that section, it's very full compared to the regular seating sections. Yeah, so I know this firsthand because, believe it or not, I used to be a young person. And that's very, very hard to imagine. But at one point in time, I was young. In fact, I told you the other day that there was that one little video of me from the Mississippi State game in 1997. I was going to show it, and I never did. But I used to be young, believe it or not. And even though I was not a Georgia student, I would cram into the Georgia student section. Now, here's how people do this. Because they stand up the entire time, they'll stand on the bleachers and they'll stand in between the bleachers. So if you look at the way in which they kind of stand sometimes, it's like the row of aluminum, they're standing on top of that. But also the concrete in front of that, there's another row standing right there. And so it's like if all the people try to sit down at once, they wouldn't be able to, because they're sitting in, I should say they're standing like basically two people for every seat. And so you are cramming, I know this is super tedious, but this is the truth. So you're cramming a bunch of people into that like 100-level section. But somehow, some way, and I'm someone who pays attention to this kind of thing, I love the fan environment. So I'm kind of always curious about the fan environment. I just like that kind of thing. In my eyes, I've always been very impressed with how full the student section was, all of them, in all eras of Kirby Smart's tenure as Georgia coach. Weak, middling opponents, a lot of times Georgia students, to their credit, were still in like raucous, numbers, even for those games. And I'm not, we're obviously a little bit critical today because of the empty seats, but by and large, I think the Georgia students still deserve a lot of credit for what they do to make it an incredible atmosphere. But even with the cramming into the 100 section, which has kind of always gone on, there is still somehow a bunch of empty seats up there that didn't used to be there, at least a couple of years ago. Let's see what else. SEM Dog says Kirby's teams always improve. Haven't shown it much yet, but Saturday would be a good time to start. I agree. And I'll try to make this point off the top of the show. Georgia has oftentimes found a higher level of play than some people thought possible, even though there was maybe not tons of evidence that they would. And I think that Saturday could be that day again there as well. That, look, there are certainly blemishes on Georgia's performances here this year. Y'all, are you really willing to give up on it all and assume that everything we thought about this team prior to the start of the season was wrong? See, some of the things that we thought may be wrong, but that doesn't mean it was all wrong. And we try to be pretty honest about this even during the moment. You've perhaps heard me say this before, because we do this show every single day. Every single day we do this. And that's during the off season there as well, Monday through Friday, every single day. I always talk about during that time of year, we have a tendency to sort of, quote unquote, bet the over on every single Georgia player. What that means is that we sort of have a tendency to sort of gravitate towards every player having their best possible top-end performance for the full season. And yet, we are also wise enough to know that while our creativity might find these optimistic projections for all the players, it's never going to be true for all of them. That it's just simply not mathematically possible for everyone to have the kind of season that you think they could have. That someone's going to disappoint, or some guys on that team are going to disappoint. And so a few of the guys that we perhaps would have projected to do this and projected to do that, they're not doing that right now. We would have been smart enough to know intellectually that was going to be true to begin with. But that doesn't mean they're all not going to be capable of being what we thought they could be, and that Georgia very well could still be the best team in the sport. Ohio State fans who got all the love in the world, they watched their quarterback. Essentially, we had the Reggie Ball type moment for Nico last week in the Tennessee-Arkansas game. Will Howard did the same thing on Saturday, where he basically gave his team no chance to win on the game's final play. You think they're happy today? Their defensive line struggled against Oregon. You think they're happy about that today? And if Georgia's not the best team, then who is? Is it Texas? Well, maybe we'll find out on Saturday. They really are unbeatable. But that's not what most of y'all were saying, a few weeks ago. Some of y'all were a little skeptical of Texas. The point is, it's like, if Georgia isn't the best team, and they may not be, you have to answer the question, well, who is? Alabama's beaten Georgia, but you've also seen the Crimson Tide in a couple of games since then. That matters too. So it is all still just way too early to predict. It just is. All right, final comments. We're ready to go. DT says, speaking of cramming into seats, Sanford Stadium numbered its seats in 1929. Guess what? Americans are, he said, a lot bigger now in 2024 than they used to be. No doubt about that. 95 years later, stadium should be renumbered to bring attendance capacity to 60,000. It'll be comfortable. Or Biggins I'm always amazed by how small people must have used to be. Not just obesity, but the concourses used to be so small. I'll tell you this too: the north side of the stadium where they've widened that concourse really looks a lot better. It's a lot easier to get around there now. They've done a pretty good job for that. But much smaller venue back then. And the old baseball stadium is the same way. You go to Fenway, you go to Wrigley Field, so small. In fact, they've had to kind of take, especially at Fenway, they've had to add ticketed area kind of outside on the streets just to have enough space to get people around there now. I guess people just have a different expectation for personal space than they used to. By the way, Laura Rain says that she and her husband are coming to Austin for the game, making the trek from Las Vegas. Laura, that's great to hear. If you get a chance to join us for DawgNation Invasion, I'd love to see you. And if not for that, maybe we can bump into each other at some point in time at the stadium there on Saturday. That's really great. That is really great. All right, final comments over here on the YouTube side of things. Jimbo Sliced Bread says, is it hard to play in Austin? Are they one of the harder environments? So I hope this is not famous last words, and I will admit to not being an expert in this because I've never been before. But by reputation, it's not really thought to be a super loud stadium, right? It's a little bit like what a Michigan is or a Notre Dame is. And listen, I'm sure somebody's going to cut this up, and it's going to end up being a challenge. I'm telling you right now, I don't know the first thing about any of this. I don't know. Texas has not been in my league before. I've never had much reason to care. But by reputation, it's not thought to be one of the louder stadiums in college football. Am I right about that? This is a very, well-to-do fan base, very, very sort of self-important and haughty and proud people that, they just don't get, rough and tumble the way that other college football fans do. At least that's the perception that I have. But I could be wrong about that. Let's see. DMart42 says they spread their away section out in Texas. It's not really a kind of a group of guys, or fans together. Yeah, kind of seeing that. What's funny is Georgia's kind of gotten the habit of doing that at one point in time, sort of splitting the fans up. A lot of stadiums do, but the truth is, visiting fans just don't travel like they used to. Like Georgia fans still travel in huge numbers, but for the most part, like last week for Auburn, there were not very many Auburn fans there for the Georgia game. There were some, but there would have been a time in which the whole 600 level would have mostly been Auburn fans for a game like that. It's just not that way anymore. I don't know what that's about, but visiting fans, other than Georgia, who still shows up in huge numbers, visiting fans just don't travel like they used to. Now, there's going to be a ton of Georgia fans in Austin, but I'll be curious to see how many Texas fans come to UGA next year. It used to be that you saw large numbers of visiting fans every single week, especially for the SEC games, and you just don't see that as much anymore. DMart says, why don't you think we're seeing the week-to-week improvements from this team like the past Kirby teams? I don't know. When I say I don't know, I'm not trying to be flippant about your question. I'm trying to answer as honestly as I can. I truly don't know. And what I don't know is this. I mean, it's only October, what is it, the 11th or 14th, October 14th. It could be that we haven't seen it yet. But it's important to note, I mean, Georgia beat Clemson 34-3. That's a pretty good performance. Slow start offensively notwithstanding. Clemson's looked really good since then. Georgia blew them out. If Georgia wins on Saturday, the entirety of this season, the first half of this regular season, I think gets recast here a little bit. I do. So it could be that these improvements that we're hoping to see from UGA, it could be they just haven't happened yet, but they're going to happen sort of right on schedule. And, many of us thought Georgia might lose a game at some point in time. Maybe the game they lost just ended up being Alabama. Or maybe the issues you had in the first half there were symbolic of what they were also going to deal with for much of the rest of the season there too. This is one of those things where you just sort of have to watch to find out. And D-Mart's a good fan. He understands that. But some of the people who want to be excessively critical, to me, it always just sort of feels like, they talk about copium on the internet, trying to cope with something. I think some fans' way of coping with a big pressure-packed game where as a fan you'll be disappointed if Georgia loses is to sort of act like Georgia has already lost before the game is played. Therefore, you're at least in control of your emotions. I think that people get really afraid of going into a big game. If Georgia wins, I'm elated. If Georgia wins, I'm disappointed. Honestly, I think that's more than some fans can handle. The unknown, the swing of emotion depending on how the outcome goes. So therefore, they kind of pre-decide to act as if Georgia's going to lose. That way, they at least are responsible for their mood, and they're not at the whim of whatever the game provides. Texas Dogs. What is Foster's question? I'm sorry. I promise. I don't try to miss things, but I'm also not always good about seeing all the comments, but never on purpose. And Foster's a good fan, so let me try to find Foster here. Foster, I promise you I'm looking for it, and I'm staying late to find it. All right, Foster, do me a favor. Write the question again, because I don't see it. Write the question again. Let me go to Facebook for 1 second, read a comment there, write it again in YouTube. And this is very dangerous to say without seeing it, but I will read your question because that's how much I trust you. Very few people would I say without seeing the question, I know that I'll read it. But Foster's a good friend, a good fan. So I'll read your question. I mean, fan of Georgia, not fan of me. So let me do a couple of Facebooks. Write the question again at the bottom, and I'll read it in a second. Chris Slim White says, we lose one game and y'all are crying. We won 2 national championships and y'all have turned into Bama fans, meaning in terms of the sort of spoiled nature. I think that Chris brings up a lot of good points on that. I really do. And listen, I'm okay with riding the wave of emotion. I mean, look, a lot of coaches will tell you that losses feel worse than wins feel good. A lot of coaches will tell you that. I think in some respect that fan stuff is kind of the same way. It's like if you had some way of measuring the intensity of feeling, it probably feels worse to lose than it does feel great to win. It probably does. And so that's where some of that comes. Maybe sort of a natural product of human nature. Joseph Kennedy says ETN's a good back. We would be in trouble if he didn't come here. That very well might be true. All right, back on YouTube. Let's find out what Foster says. He didn't write it. Where is it? Is Foster gone? I told him to write the comment and he didn't do it. Well, now I'll never know what it was. Foster, I was going to read it and you didn't do it. All right. If you're still here, Foster, write it one more time. So yeah, Texas Dog says he removed it. Okay, so here it is. He says, would you compare this Texas team to the 22 Tennessee team? The thing is, our defense just isn't as good. All right, let me try to work through this. I definitely believe that Georgia's defense right now is not as good as it was in 2022. And so the fact that Georgia, because honestly, like, I'm going to take a couple seconds on this, Foster. 2022 will always be one of my favorite years as a fan. In some respects, even more so than 2021, because as a fan that year, I was pretty confident in Georgia. Based on what they did against Oregon, what they did against South Carolina, and comparing that to Alabama that had some early season struggles and Ohio State that year that had some early season struggles, I actually came to the conclusion pretty quickly. I think Georgia's pretty good. And it did sort of occur to me, I think that Georgia's going to win this thing again. Now, I say it all the time. I get stuff wrong all the time. This is not a how right I was, nostalgia. But my point is, it felt good that year to truly be confident. And I remember the Tennessee game. I'll always remember this. It was so much fun for me that week because I was pretty confident. Nervous, of course, but confident that people were shortchanging Georgia going into that game. Because as you said, the Georgia defense back then was still good enough to put a stranglehold on a high-powered Tennessee offense. And I felt like they could do that. And so it felt really good to go into a big game thinking, man, my team's about to show the world how wrong they are, and then to have Georgia actually do that. I am nowhere near that confident this week. Nowhere near that confident for the reasons that you mentioned. I don't know that this Texas offense is as high-powered as that Tennessee offense could be, but I'll tell you this. I think that Steve Sarkisian's a really sharp offensive mind. I do. And so even if they don't quite have the challenge that Tennessee had, because remember that year, that one receiver they had, he was like so wide open. The Heupel back then was just scheming guys to the point when he'd catch the ball, there was nobody else in the TV screen. Like he was just so wide open that it seemed like Heupel was really scheming it up back then. I don't know that Texas is quite scheming it that way. I don't believe their receivers this year are as good as they were a year ago, but they are good. They are really, really good. And they're going to be really tough on Georgia. And I'd give anything if I could be as confident now as I was back before Tennessee in 2022. Look, I'm not going to insult your intelligence. I'm going to pick Georgia to win the game on Saturday. I'm not ever in a game like this going to openly pick against UGA. It's just not any fun to do that. This is still a show that's for fun and for entertainment. There may come a time in which you can't make a justifiable case for Georgia. That day is not now. So I'm going to pick Georgia to win the game. But am I as confident, or do I have any chance of being as confident as I would have been back in 2022? No. The only thing that gives me confidence is that the moment people start being super certain of something, super sure about something, college football just has a way of surprising you. And so right now, there are a growing number of people, certainly outside DawgNation, but even within the fan base, there are a growing number of people who just think Georgia doesn't have it. They may turn out to be right. They might. But the one thing I do take some confidence in is once a consensus starts to form, college football has a way of confounding that. And maybe that's the case here this week too. So hopefully that does answer your question, because I think it's a good one. This is going to be a week probably unlike any Georgia has had since prior to that game against Tennessee in 2022. But that game was in Athens. This one's in Austin. This is a Texas team ranked number 1. This is a Texas team favored in the game. Georgia was still favored by like 9 points against Tennessee back in 2022, as much as the public sentiment seemed to be against UGA. Georgia was still a very big point spread favorite. In this game, Georgia is predicted to lose. So it is a different feel around it, and certainly a lot of room to talk about that here this week. All right. We got to go. It's so late. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. And make sure you trust RS Andrews. Our good friend Kaylee Manziel was telling me before the show, it's about to be cold front moving in, as I believe the meteorological term for all of that. And so your heating system is about to kick on. When it does, is yours going to work the way it's supposed to? And can it work for you all winter long? Get the peace of mind you need by getting it tuned back up to factory fresh specs online with our friends at RS Andrews at rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. Back here tomorrow, Dog Nation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.